I guess overnight or pretty recently, I saw it reported that the Taliban actually launched an attack on the capital of the Helmand province in Afghanistan. And so, just again, looking back at this ethnic map of Afghanistan for anybody who's watching the video feed here, when we're talking about this area, it looks pretty heavily in the light blue area to me, Danny. And so, is there a problem in Afghanistan getting people from the Hazara or the Tajik ethnic group to go to Helmand and fight and die for Lashkar? And yeah, I'm guessing that if it's a problem there, it's probably going to be a problem like Kandahar, Farah, and all these heavily Pashtun areas.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Kandahar in the height of the Obama surge. Like, we had the top amount of soldiers. I was just southwest of the city, out in like like literally out in like the hillbilly. I mean, frankly, the part of Afghanistan I was in is like Hatfields and McCoys, like Appalachia. I mean, it was intense. Taliban was founded just miles from where I was working in Zari district in the village of Sangasar, which was the home village of Mullah Omar, who was kind of like the founder and the leader of the Taliban for the longest time. I always would say fighting down there was like we were fighting on a home on the Taliban's home turf. It was always an away game. We were the Yankees coming into Fenway Park. It ain't an easy place to play, right? Same goes for Lashkar Gah and Helmand, the two highest casualty provinces for American forces among all of Afghanistan's provinces throughout the course of the war. Was number one, Helmand had the most KIA, most killed in action Americans. Number two was Kandahar. It was a big problem taking the Afghan security forces down there and having them not only be motivated to fight in these disparate regions, very far from where they usually were from, which is central Afghanistan if they were Hazara, north central if they were Uzbek, northeast if they were Tajik. It was hard getting them to be motivated to fight, but also a lot of them didn't even speak Pashto. Like, they needed an interpreter as much as I did. They had trouble connecting with the people because the people saw them as almost as much of an outsider as me. Almost as much of an outsider as me. I told a one-star general who came to visit me when I was starting this local police program. He was asking me about my quote unquote partnered Afghan forces, like the army guys that were on my base that I shared a base with. And I told him that. I said, well, sir, I said it like he already knew it. I was like, sir, obviously most of these guys are from the north. A lot of them don't even speak Pashto. The people don't really connect with them. They see them as outsiders. And he was like, wait, stop right there. What did you just say? And I was like, dude, you're the deputy commander of the entire southern Afghanistan, RC South province, right? Regional Command South. And this is news to you? That some of these guys need interpreters? That these people are from like hundreds and hundreds of miles away and are seen as outsiders? Like, that was the obtuseness and the ignorance that largely ran this war. Not every one of our generals was that ignorant, but that happened. The guy was like surprised. And so I don't know that it's realistic that something like the Taliban wouldn't be popular in that region, some sort of Pashto majority military force. Another thing to keep in mind is that now Kandahar is seen as kind of Afghanistan's second city after Kabul. It's kind of like Chicago or something, But historically, Kandahar was seen as the key heartland of what's now Afghanistan. To the Pashto people who live on both sides of the Durand Line, which arbitrarily divides Afghanistan from Pakistan. The British drew that essentially. That half the Pashto essentially in the world live in that part of Pakistan right over the border. Half of them live in like southern and eastern Afghanistan. To those people, to that large and partly stateless people, in terms of not having like a Pashtunistan, they're kind of like the Kurds in that way. To those folks, Kandahar is the center of their culture, of their history, and has been traditionally. So Helmand, of course, is right next door and is also a big-time Pashtun heartland. I've always thought it was sort of unrealistic that we believed that the Kabul government could maintain centralized control, not devolved sort of autonomous status, but centralized state control over Kandahar and Helmand the same way that, say, the United States does, or France, or the Netherlands, over its provinces. I always thought that was unrealistic. I said so 10 years ago when I was there. I was sort of laughed away. Oh, no, no, of course we can do it. We're going to win. Great. Well, we're not winning, and I'm doing the fighting, and we're not winning. But now we're seeing that play out. I suspect that at best, Kabul's going to maintain for a while, I don't think forever, control over like Kandahar city, although districts of that are now being contested already. It's a big city. Some of the outlying districts are already being contested. And maybe Lashkar Gah, I think that'll be even harder to hold because it's even more distant than Kandahar is. This thing's going to probably break down into a sort of like a stasis like it used to be. It's going to end up like becoming like de facto partitioned probably in the short term. I don't know about the long term. I don't know if Taliban takes the whole country again almost, but essentially I think we're going to see the country divide along ethnic lines. The real disaster, the real nightmare scenario is that it breaks down into 1990s style chaos and civil war and anarchy among warring warlord militias, of which the Taliban is only one of the main players, probably the most powerful. If that happens, that's a tragedy for the Afghan people. And then we'll have to look at the American phase as like a blip on the radar. Just one more indecency, just one more warlord, this one headquartered in Washington, who came in to terrorize the Afghan people because they're the real victims.
One quick question on that, I guess. Would there? I have no idea. Like, can Afghan kind of divide neatly along ethnic lines? I know the Soviets got into and made a mess. I've also seen, at least by the official statistics, the city of Kabul grew from like a population of 500,000 to almost 5 million over the course of the U.S. occupation in that country. And so I'm guessing that involves a lot of different ethnic groups being in one area. And so, maybe historically Kandahar was more central to the Pashtuns, but because the U.S. has made Kabul so important, and now I think there's like Pashtun warlords that are in Kabul, who's to say that that doesn't, I guess, just become, the new center for the Pashtuns and they essentially own that city or something like that?
Yeah, can you pull that ethnic map back up real quick?
Yeah.
So the short answer, and it's a really important question that you raised. The short answer to that question is no. There's absolutely no way to neatly partition. There never was, and you're right. It's even more complicated now that Kabul's become like a megapolis. It's become like a megacity. Kabul is like sort of a microcosm of all of Afghanistan because every ethnic group lives there. So it also has Kabul airport. There's a lot of customs money to be, gained or stolen or skimmed off the top that comes through there. So all the different sides, if this thing breaks down, the Kabul government, the different warlords from the northern ethnic militias, and of course the Taliban are all going to be fighting for Kabul. The Taliban is not going to be satisfied with a partition that doesn't involve them controlling Kabul. What it would really break down to is almost like more like a slice of Swiss cheese or something. Like it, when I say a de facto partition, it's not going to be a neat north-south transition. I mean, there are Pashtu. If you look up in the north, there are Pashtu who live with the Uzbeks and the Tajiks up there in the north-central part of Afghanistan. What are you going to do with them? The Hazaras are surrounded. They're in trouble. They always take the brunt of it. I mean, they're Shia and they're like the Hazara ethnic group. So they hate them. The Taliban, for example, hate the Hazaras because they don't like their ethnic group and they also think they're infidels. Or apostates is a better word because they're Shia. That's a problem. The Tajiks, who I believe are, I don't know if they're the red or I don't know if you can tell me if they're the red or if they're the dark green, but the Tajiks will probably be able to hold like an enclave like they did as part of the Northern Alliance in the very like northeast of the country. Specifically that one valley that escapes me where that famous warlord for the Tajiks kind of held off the Soviets for a long time, was able to hold off the Taliban. The Uzbeks, they've got like their fiefdom, and they've got Rashid Dostum, who's like the general, former vice president, and like basically war criminal extraordinaire who still runs their kind of private army. But even they are scattered a bit. So it's not a neat country. This map is very instructive. No, there's no neat partition. I fear that this thing is going to break down into basically 5.5 sides, which is to say, I think the Kabul government's going to hold on for a little while and still maintain some sway, but much diminished. So there'll be one party to the civil war. Taliban will be the strongest party. The Hazaras are already forming their own ethnic militias, which they've done less of than the other groups up till this point, but they're forming a bunch. Um, the Tajiks are going to be a major player up in the northeast, and the Uzbeks in kind of like the north central and northwest. And then the half is going to be the United States wild card: drones, CIA, proxies, contractors. One could also add another half, which would add up to 6, which would be Pakistan and the ISI and the extent to which they try to weigh in. It appears they have less overt control over the Taliban than they used to. Taliban's a little bit more of a free agent, independent actor now. The ISI doesn't seem to have quite as much control over them. So they're another player. So at the very least, we're looking at basically 7 players, right? 5 of which are on the ground, hardcore in Afghanistan, and 2 of which are external actors, being Pakistan and the United States. It's a real mess.